I came home on a Tuesday evening the way I always did, tired from work, carrying a takeaway bag, already planning what I would do after dinner. I pushed open the door to my room and stopped. My clothes were in black trash bags piled in the corridor like they were waiting for the bin men. My bed had been taken apart, the frame leaning against the wall in pieces. Where my desk used to sit, there was a gaming chair in its box and a large monitor beside it, also boxed. My shelves were bare. The small framed photograph of me and my late grandmother, the one I had kept on my bedside table for 11 years, was face down on the floor. My mother stood in the doorway of what used to be my room. My brother Emeka was behind her with a tape measure. My father stood in the corridor with his arms folded. My mother looked at me with a particular combination of impatience and finality that meant a decision had been made and would not be revisited. "It's Emeka's room now," she said. "You're an adult. You'll manage." I looked at my grandmother's photograph on the floor. I bent down, picked it up, placed it carefully in my handbag. Then I smiled. Nobody in my family knew what to do with my smile. They had been expecting tears, or an argument, or the kind of pleading I had offered before in smaller losses. My mother narrowed her eyes. My father unfolded his arms and folded them again. Emeka laughed and held up his phone, filming me. "She's going to cry," he said to the camera. "Watch." I didn't cry. I walked to the trash bags and began going through them, separating what I would take immediately from what I could collect later. I worked quietly and methodically. I had learned long ago that surviving in this house required making yourself small and efficient. I folded what needed folding. I checked nothing irreplaceable was missing. When I had filled my suitcase and weekend bag, I zipped them both, stood straight, and looked at my mother. "Thank you," I said. She frowned. "For what?" "For the clarity." I didn't explain. My father started to say something about overreacting, about making a scene from nothing. But I was already moving toward the front door, suitcase wheels rolling on the tiles. My mother's voice followed me down the corridor. "You'll be back," she called. "You always come back." I did not look behind me. My friend Nkechi had a small apartment 20 minutes away. She had been telling me for 2 years to leave my family home. I had always had reasons: money, obligation, the utility bills in my name, the unspoken rule that the responsible child does not walk away. She opened the door when I knocked, looked at my suitcase and my face, and stepped aside without a word. She made tea. I sat on her couch and held the mug with both hands, and for 10 minutes I said nothing. Then what I had been holding together came loose and I cried properly, the kind of crying that has been waiting a long time. Nkechi sat beside me and let it happen. When it was over, I told her everything, not just about the room, but all of it. The years of it. Every family decision shaped around Emeka's comfort and my endurance. Being praised for being strong while being handed another burden. Love in my family had always felt like a transaction I was losing. Nkechi listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Whose name," she said carefully, "is actually on the house documents?" I had no answer. But the question was already inside me. I had never thought about the house as a legal object. To me, it had always belonged to the family, the way a name belongs to a person, unquestionable, fixed. But Nkechi's question stayed with me through the night. In the morning, I sat with my laptop and thought carefully about money. About my money specifically. I had been working since I was 22. I had never been unemployed. I had paid my own way through a professional certificate program while my brother dropped out of university twice, both times funded by my parents without question. I had contributed to the household since my first salary, monthly transfers consistent, never questioned. I had told myself it was normal, that families helped each other. But I had been helping in one direction for a very long time. My parents had covered Emeka's failures, university fees, a crashed car, an abandoned business, while I quietly funded my own life and a portion of theirs. I had been the responsible child not because I was more loved, but because I was trusted to absorb more. I opened my banking app and looked at the transfers I had made over the past 3 years. Then I noticed something I had not noticed before. The transfers were going out every month, regular as a standing order, to an account I recognized, a joint household account my parents controlled. I had set it up years ago when my father was between jobs and the bills needed covering. That had been temporary. The bills were covered. My father found work again, but the transfers had never stopped. I had never canceled them. They had simply continued month after month because I had not looked closely enough. I went through 12 months of statements. The amounts were consistent, always within a similar range, transferred in the first week of every month. I added them up. The total was more significant than I had allowed myself to consider. I cross-checked dates against my own records. The transfers had started when my salary increased, a raise I had been proud of and had mentioned to my mother. 2 weeks after that conversation, the transfer amounts had gone up. I sat with that for a long time. Then I looked at the most recent transfer, dated 3 weeks ago. The reference label was different from the usual one. It said mortgage. I read it twice. I set my phone down on the table. The quiet in Ketchy's kitchen felt suddenly very different. My parents had always referred to the house as theirs. It was a point of pride. My father spoke of it as evidence of his achievement, the house he had built for the family. I had grown up understanding it to belong to them the way a name belongs to a person. I had never asked to see the paperwork because the question had never seemed necessary. But the word mortgage in that transfer reference had opened a door I could not close again. The following day, I made quiet inquiries. A colleague who handled property documentation listened and told me things that required me to sit down. When a mortgage is taken out on a property, the bank assesses the financial profile of the applicant. If the applicant's profile is insufficient, a cosigner may be added. The cosigner's credit history is used to secure the loan. The cosigner carries full financial liability if payments are missed. I asked what happened to the cosigner if the primary holders defaulted. My colleague looked at me carefully. Their credit record would be destroyed, she said, and they could be pursued for the full outstanding amount. I thanked her, returned to my desk, and sat very still. I already knew what I would find. The memory arrived all at once, complete and detailed. I was 24. My father had called me to the house on a Saturday morning, unusual for him. He and my mother sat at the kitchen table with a folder of papers. My father explained, in the patient tone he used when he had already decided something, that the family was refinancing the house to get a better interest rate. The process required someone with a strong credit record to be added to the documentation. He said it would be administrative, temporary, that my name would be removed once the refinancing was complete. He said it was just how the process worked. My mother had made my favorite food for lunch that day. I had felt wanted. I had felt like the capable one, trusted with important things. I signed where they pointed. I did not read the full document because my father was there and I had trusted him. I trusted the version of events I was given because it was easier than asking questions that might mean I was being difficult. 4 years had passed since that Saturday morning. My name had not been removed from the documentation. The refinancing rate had apparently required ongoing financial contributions from my account. The word temporary had simply never been mentioned again. The lawyer's office was small and neat, on the 3rd floor of a building near the commercial district. Her name was Folake. She had been recommended by Nkechi's older sister as someone who did not waste time on softness. She did not. I brought everything: bank statements, transfer records, a photograph of the co-signing document I had located in an old email thread, and a written timeline prepared the night before. She read through all of it without speaking, then set the papers down and looked at me with an expression that was entirely serious. She explained it clearly. I was a co-signer on a mortgage. My financial liability was real and legally binding. The transfers from my account constituted evidence of ongoing financial contribution to the property. However, my name was not on the title deed. I had no legal ownership despite my financial exposure. This, she said, was not an oversight. It was a structure. Someone had deliberately arranged for me to carry risk without receiving protection. She used the word fraud carefully, prefaced with qualifications, but she used it. Then she asked a question I had not expected. "Do you want justice?" she said, "or do you want silence?" I asked her what each option looked like. She told me. I went home. I found out about Emeka's debts the way I found out about most things in that family, through small observations and a willingness to follow what I noticed to its conclusion. His phone had changed from an expensive model to a cheaper one. The car my parents had bought him was absent from the driveway. I had assumed these were passing inconveniences. After my meeting with Folake, I paid closer attention. I spoke to my cousin Dammy, who was close to Emeka in the way cousins sometimes are, not deeply but informationally. Over a casual call, I guided the conversation gently, and Dammy, unaware of what I was looking for, gave me more than I needed. Emeka had borrowed money from 3 different sources over the past 18 months. The amounts were not small. He had told each lender a version of the same story, that the family-owned property and repayment was guaranteed by that asset. He had used the family home as informal collateral with people who trusted the family name.
He was not employed.
He had not been consistently employed for a year. The gaming setup in my former room had been purchased on a credit arrangement not disclosed to our parents. He was not the golden child. He was a liability. The missed mortgage payments were not a surprise, but seeing the documentation still produced something cold in my chest. Folake had requested the records through proper channels as part of the preliminary legal review. The mortgage had 3 missed payments in the last 6 months. The bank had sent 2 warning letters to the house address. My parents had not mentioned the letters, not to me, and apparently not to each other in any productive way, because the payments had continued to be missed. The property was not yet in formal foreclosure proceedings, but the language in the most recent bank communication used terms that meant it was approaching that threshold. My name was on the mortgage. If this property entered foreclosure, my credit record would be the one most immediately and severely damaged. I was the co-signer with the strongest financial profile, therefore the one the bank would pursue first. My parents did not know I had seen these documents. Neither did my brother. As far as they were all aware, I was the daughter who had been displaced from her room and gone to stay with a friend, hurt and waiting to be invited back. They believed they understood exactly where I was and what I was thinking. They did not. I had a choice about timing. I could confront them immediately, which would be satisfying in the short term and strategically useless in every other way. Or I could use the time I had, while they still believed I was simply wounded and waiting, to do the work that would actually matter. I chose the work. The first thing I did was contact my bank and begin separating my finances from the household account. I canceled the standing transfer on a Tuesday morning from my phone before finishing my first cup of tea. It took less than 3 minutes. The transfer that had been leaving my account every month for 3 years simply stopped. I felt the absence of it the way you feel the removal of something that has been pressing on you for a long time without your noticing. The second thing I did was instruct Folake to begin the formal documentation process, compiling everything into a record. The third thing I did was nothing. I did not call my parents. I did not respond to Emeka's 2 messages, which were the kind a person sends when they want to confirm that nothing has changed. I did not warn them. I waited while the structure built on my compliance began to feel its absence. The call came Thursday evening, 10 days after I left. My mother's number. I let it ring twice and answered. Her voice had the texture of someone performing distress while delivering a demand. She said she was worried about me. She said the family was not the same without me. She said my father's health was suffering. Then, after 4 minutes of this, she arrived at the purpose of the call. The mortgage payment was due. There was a shortfall. She said it in a way that assumed I would respond the way I always had, with a transfer and a few reassuring words. I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." She waited for me to continue. I didn't. She said, "We need you to cover it." I said, "I can't do that." There was a silence I had never heard before. No. My father took the phone, his voice performing authority. He said I was selfish, that families supported each other, that I had obligations. I said, I understood he felt that way. He said, "We made you who you are." I said, "I know." The call ended. My brother sent a message that evening containing none of the words a person uses when speaking to someone they respect. Folake's folder was actually a bound document, organized by category, with page numbers and a table of contents. Section 1. Bank Transfer Records, 3 years of monthly contributions from my account, cross-referenced against mortgage payment dates. Section 2. The co-signing agreement with a clause specifying my liability and the email thread in which my father described the arrangement as temporary. Section 3. The title deed showing my parents as sole legal owners, with no mention of my name despite my co-signing liability. Section 4. The bank's warning letters and the missed payment records. Section 5. A legal analysis identifying the arrangement as fraudulent misrepresentation of my role and obligations. She had included a communication from a debt recovery specialist confirming the bank's next step, if a payment was missed, was to contact all parties on the mortgage documentation. That included me. Folake looked at me across the desk. "This is everything," she said. "The fraud is undeniable. They used your credit, took your money, gave you no ownership. The paper trail makes that clear." She paused. "What they built required your name. Now your name is the most powerful thing in the room." I looked at the bound document in front of me. For the first time since that Tuesday evening, something in my chest began to settle. My parents had begun constructing a narrative. I became aware of it through Dammy, who mentioned during another casual call that the topic of me had come up at a family gathering I had not attended. My mother had spoken with a version of events in which I had grown difficult, rejected family values, and in a moment of selfishness abandoned them when they needed me most. The word abandoned was doing considerable work in her version. She had also suggested to at least 2 relatives that I was going through something, a phase, a confusion, and that the family was being patient with me. My father had said less, but had allowed her version to go unchallenged, which was its own form of endorsement. Emeka had stayed mostly quiet, which I suspected had less to do with loyalty and more to do with not wanting too much scrutiny on the household's financial situation. I noted all of this carefully. I did not call relatives to correct the narrative. I did not post anything publicly. I simply said to Dammy, "Thank you for telling me," and filed the information where I was keeping everything I would eventually need. Silence at this particular stage was not weakness. It was exactly what the situation required. The bank's formal warning letter arrived at the house on a Wednesday. Folake had been monitoring the timeline and informed me when the threshold for formal correspondence was crossed. I was not there to see my parents open it, but I could construct the scene from what I knew of them. My father would have read it twice, his face becoming the particular shade of gray that appeared when a problem could no longer be avoided. My mother would have asked what it said, and then asked again louder. The letter would have used clear language about the consequences of continued non-payment. It would have listed the parties named on the mortgage documentation.
My name would have appeared on that list.
This was the moment I imagined when they first understood that the situation was not simply about a monthly shortfall I could be pressured into covering. My name was not on the title, but it was on the liability. The bank did not distinguish between those two things when it came to recovery. I had not warned them this was coming. I had not told them about Folake, about the documentation, about any of it. They were encountering the consequences of their own structure for the first time, without me there to absorb the shock on their behalf. They offered me the room back on a Saturday morning. My mother called and, in a voice stripped of its usual confidence, said things had been handled badly and that my room was still my room if I wanted it. I was in Ketchy's kitchen eating scrambled eggs and let her finish before responding. I thanked her. I said I appreciated the gesture. I said I would not be coming back. She was quiet and then said the offer included an apology for my father, which was significant. My father did not apologize for things. I said I heard that, and it meant something to me. Then I said the thing I had been preparing for days, not as a performance, but to say it correctly. "Mummy," I said, "this was never about the room." She asked what it was about. I told her it was about a pattern. About co-signing a mortgage I was told was temporary. About 3 years of monthly transfers. About missed payments on a property my name was attached to without my knowledge of the risk. I told her calmly, the way you tell someone a fact. The silence on the other end was different from any silence I had heard from her before. This one had something close to fear in it. I told them I knew not everything at once, but in stages, the way Folake had advised, so each disclosure could land separately and be clearly understood. I called a family meeting, which was itself unusual enough to produce immediate anxiety. I had never called one before. We met at a quiet restaurant chosen by me, and I arrived with a folder and with Folake, who sat beside me and said nothing for most of the meeting, but whose presence communicated something words alone could not. My mother looked at Folake, and then at me, and I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. My father's expression was one I had not seen before. Not anger, not authority, but something more exposed. I went through it methodically. The co-signing arrangement, the transfers, the missed payments, the legal structure placing me at financial risk while giving me no ownership. I did not shout. I did not cry. I presented each item as documented fact, attached to a specific piece of paper, available for review. My brother sat across the table and said nothing for 20 minutes. Then he tried to speak and Folake looked at him, and he stopped. My parents looked at each other, like two people caught standing in a room they had claimed was empty. The threats came in stages, spread across 3 days following the restaurant meeting. My mother called twice. The first call contained crying and appeals to God and reminders of her sacrifices. The second contained accusations. My father sent a message saying that if I pursued legal action, the family name would be damaged, and I would be responsible for that damage. Emeka, who had been quiet at the meeting, sent a long message full of language I will not repeat, the central argument of which was that I was destroying the family for money and had always been cold and calculating. I read all of these communications carefully. I saved each one, screenshotted every message, and forwarded them to Folake's secure email. She had told me at the beginning that evidence of intimidation was useful, and I had been collecting it carefully. On the third day, a relative I had not spoken to in a year called to encourage reconciliation. I thanked her for her concern. I said I was working toward resolution and appreciated her care. I did not describe what the resolution looked like from where I was standing. Folake's formal filings were already being prepared. The legal process had a momentum that required only my patience, which I had discovered I possessed in considerable supply. The accounts began showing effects in the 4th week. The joint household account, the one my monthly transfers had been feeding for 3 years, had been depleted more quickly than my parents apparently expected. They had been budgeting around my contribution as though it were permanent income. Without it, the ordinary costs of the household surfaced in ways that could not be deferred. My father's credit line, partly supported by the property's assumed value, received a reassessment notification. Emeka's informal loan arrangements, secured using the family home as a verbal guarantee, began attracting the kind of attention informal lenders apply when payments stop arriving. One of those lenders, Dami mentioned, had come to the house in person. The house itself had entered what the bank's correspondents now called a formal review period, meaning any further missed payment would trigger the next stage of the default process. I was aware of all of this from a distance, through Folake's updates and Dami's occasional reports. I was also aware that I was the only person connected to that household who had full visibility of the complete picture. My parents could each see their individual pressures. My brother could see his. Nobody but me could see how all the pieces connected and where the whole structure was heading. The call that came in the 5th week was different. My father, and the authority in his voice was gone. What was there instead was something I needed a moment to identify: genuine uncertainty, the sound of a person who has run out of prepared positions. He said things had become complicated. He said the house situation was more serious than he had realized. He said he needed my help. I listened to all of it. I did not feel the pull of it the way I would have felt it 6 months earlier. I felt something closer to sadness, not for my present circumstances, which were better than they had been in years, but for the version of this conversation that could have existed in a family where the words matched the actions. I told my father I was not able to rescue the financial situation at the house. My exposure was being managed through legal channels, and any resolution would need to go through those channels. I offered him Folake's contact information. I told him she was professional and fair.
He was quiet for a long time.
Then he asked if I was really going to do this to them. I said, "Daddy, I didn't build this structure. I just finally read the blueprints." The relatives found out in pieces, which was messier than all at once, but ultimately more thorough. When a family's difficulties are revealed gradually, each new piece of information is absorbed separately, and by the time the full picture emerges, people have formed their own conclusions rather than simply accepting the version they were first given. My parents had worked hard to establish their narrative early: the difficult daughter, the abandonment, the ingratitude. But narratives require maintenance, and maintaining a false one becomes harder when documented truth is moving through legal channels and producing paper that exists independently of anyone's version of events. Dami, who genuinely believed families should know what was happening within the family, shared what she knew with two aunts who shared with others.
I had not asked Dami to do this.
I had simply not asked her not to. The picture that emerged was not shaped by my telling of it. It was shaped by the evidence, which had a way of speaking clearly for itself. My mother's carefully constructed version began losing its footing when relatives asked questions she could not answer without revealing what she had been concealing. By the time I heard about the conversation at a cousin's gathering, my father had stopped talking about the situation publicly altogether. The signing happened on a quiet morning in Folake's office, with the sun coming through the window at a low angle. There were several documents. Folake walked me through each one before I signed, explaining what I was agreeing to and what it secured. The legal resolution was not a dramatic reversal, it was a structured settlement. My name was formally removed from the mortgage documentation, which required the bank's cooperation and a refinancing arrangement my parents would need to manage without my credit profile. My financial liability was formally extinguished. The 3 years of transfers were documented as evidence and formed the basis of a financial restitution agreement to be paid back over time through a formal structure Folake would administer. It was not everything I had put in, but it was a fair portion of it, arrived at through negotiation, without a court hearing. Folake had advised that a negotiated resolution was faster and protected my credit record more effectively than a prolonged legal process. I had agreed. I signed each page carefully, reading every clause. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something quieter than that, the specific feeling of a weight being removed that you have been carrying so long you had stopped noticing how much it was pressing down on you. The nuclear truth was this: the house could not exist in its current financial structure without my name. The refinancing the bank required, now that the default risk had become formal and documented, required a credit profile strong enough to satisfy the new terms. My parents' combined financial profile, without my credit history supporting it, did not meet those terms. The bank's assessment was clear. The property would either need to be refinanced with new guarantors or sold to settle the outstanding mortgage balance. My parents had no alternative guarantors. The relatives who had heard the story were not inclined to step into a financial structure that had already produced the results they had been watching. Emeka's own credit record was, Folake established, severely compromised by his undisclosed borrowing. He was not a resource. He was a liability, which was what I had known for some time and what my parents were only now confronting fully. The house my father had spoken about with such consistent pride that my mother had used as the setting for every version of herself she presented to the world was no longer theirs to keep. The legal displacement was not something I caused. It was something their own structure, finally without my name to hold it up, had caused for itself. My parents lost the house in the sense that it was sold, not seized, not foreclosed catastrophically, but sold under bank-managed conditions because refinancing could not be arranged and the outstanding mortgage needed to be settled. The process took several months from the point the legal resolution was finalized. They moved into a smaller rental property, which my father described to relatives as a temporary arrangement while they reassessed their plans. Emeka moved in with them, which was its own form of consequence. The golden child, unemployed, in debt, living in a small rental with parents navigating the aftermath of a collapsed financial structure. I heard about the move through Dami and through one cousin who called, not unkindly, to check I was all right. I was all right. I was more than all right. I had a lease on a one-bedroom apartment I had chosen myself. I had a savings account growing for the first time in years because nothing was leaving it without my knowledge and consent. I had a credit record that remained intact because Folake had moved quickly and the formal documentation had protected it before any default consequences could attach. On my bedside table, in a new frame, was my grandmother's photograph, in a room that was entirely mine. My apartment is on the 4th floor of a building that gets good light in the mornings. I drink my tea by the window before work and watch the street below and think about what it feels like to occupy space that you chose, that nobody else decided for you, that carries none of the weight of obligations handed to you before you were old enough to read the fine print.
I do not hate my parents.
I am not certain I have forgiven them, but forgiveness is something I will approach in my own time and on my own terms. I think about Emeka sometimes, not with anger, but pity. He is still learning that structures others build for you are not the same as what you build yourself, and the difference matters when those structures fall. The room they gave him cost them everything. I do not say this with satisfaction. I say it as a fact. What I do say with something approaching satisfaction is this. They took my room thinking I would lose my place in the family. But what I actually lost, document by document, signature by signature, was my chains. I am standing in my own apartment. The light this morning is very good.